If you had to spend tonight at 30 degrees Fahrenheit, would you last longer than a Lakota child from 300 years ago? Because back then, survival depended on skill, and most modern people don't have it. For the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and many others, home was never defined by walls, foundations, or fixed coordinates. It was defined by movement, by following the heartbeat of the prairie, by trailing massive herds of buffalo across thousands of miles of open land. Where the animals moved, the people moved. Where the prairie breathed, they adapted. Mobility was not a choice. It was the foundation of survival. And because the tribe moved, their shelter had to move too. It had to be dismantled in minutes, carried across rugged terrain, rebuilt before nightfall, and remain strong through snowstorms, brutal winds, and freezing temperatures. That is why the Tipi was more than a tent. It was engineering born from necessity. Lightweight enough for horses or even dogs to drag across grasslands, yet stable enough to withstand the screaming winter winds, the Tipi solved problems that modern cabins could never face. Over centuries, the Plains tribes refined this structure with an almost scientific precision. Each pole, each knot, each hide had a purpose. It stood tall in the open landscape, not because it fought nature, but because it worked with it. The Tipi shed wind like a feather, breathed through its opening at the top, and sealed warmth inside like a well-insulated lodge. In storms, it stayed anchored. In heat, it ventilated. In deep winter, it protected entire families from deadly cold. It was sustainable, repairable, reusable, long before eco-friendly became a modern phrase. The Tipi represented intelligence shaped by generations. A design tested not in theory, but in the unforgiving realities of the Great Plains. It was elegance rooted in survival, proof that indigenous engineering could match the demands of one of the harshest climates on Earth. Building a teepee was not simply construction, it was the creation of a winter fortress. It began with selecting the right poles, long, straight, resilient. 3 or 4 of them were bound together to form a tripod, a stable backbone for everything that followed. Around this core, 12 to 20 additional poles were placed, spreading outward to form a wide cone that could stand against blizzards and relentless prairie winds. These poles were more than supports. They were the ribs of a living structure designed to protect an entire family. The outer covering transformed the frame into a home. Carefully prepared buffalo hides were sewn together with remarkable precision, each seam aligned to keep out wind, snow, and freezing air. For a family-sized teepee, 13 to 16 hides were needed, fitted and tightened so no draft could penetrate. These hides weren't just covers, they were insulation, waterproofing, and armor against the elements. Every hide carried the memory of the bison that had given its life. Every stitch held the care of the hands that made it. Later generations sometimes replaced hide with canvas, lighter, easier to pack, yet still remarkably durable. But whether hide or canvas, the purpose remained the same. Shelter that could survive the Great Plains winter. What looked simple from the outside was, in truth, a masterpiece of design, a structure engineered to endure cold, resist wind, retain heat, and remain mobile. A teepee wasn't temporary housing. It was a portable stronghold, built not by machines, but by knowledge carried through generations. Transforming a simple cone of poles into a true winter home required more than craftsmanship. It required an understanding of heat, airflow, and insulation that rivaled modern engineering. When winter settled over the plains, families hung a full inner lining of hides or cloth, creating a second wall within the teepee. Between the outer cover and this inner lining, dried grasses or cattail fluff were tucked carefully, forming layers of dead air. This invisible buffer trapped warmth just like the insulation inside today's winter jackets, turning what outsiders might mistake for a tent into a remarkably efficient shelter. The teepee didn't fight the wind, it embraced it. Its slightly tilted frame and carefully anchored base redirected gusts, allowing storms to glide around rather than slam against it. Stones, snowbanks, or wooden stakes secured the edges so nothing flapped or tore. Cold air stayed outside, warm air stayed in. The cone shape, perfected across generations, wasn't just aesthetic, it was aerodynamic survival. Inside, Life revolved around a central fire. Not a roaring blaze, but a controlled and steady glow that warmed the space, cooked meals, dried clothing, and illuminated night gatherings. The smoke hole at the top, combined with adjustable flaps, acted like a natural chimney. Smoke escaped easily, heat remained, and the air inside stayed breathable even during the harshest nights. It was a design that required no metal, no nails, no industrial tools, only knowledge and experience passed down through families. What many would call a tent was, in truth, a house engineered against winter itself. Daily life inside the teepee was shaped by winter, and every detail mattered. Clothing wasn't simply a covering, it was a carefully engineered layer of protection. Animal hides and furs, tanned and softened with remarkable skill, were transformed into robes, moccasins, leggings, and cloaks. The fur always faced inward, trapping countless pockets of warm air against the body, creating insulation just as effective as modern thermal wear. And when the wind cut like knives, some tribes rubbed bear fat or goose grease onto exposed skin. It sealed warmth in, blocked the biting cold, and created a barrier against frostbite that made the difference between life and death. Sleeping arrangements were equally deliberate. The ground was softened with dried grasses that formed the first insulating layer. On top of that came hides thick, durable, and weatherproof. Finally, heavy buffalo robes were spread over everything, sealing in heat. The result wasn't luxury, but it was comfort, and more importantly, it was survival. Each layer held still air, and still air meant warmth. People slept close, sharing heat in the darkness, while the fire's embers glowed faintly in the center of the teepee. This wasn't improvisation. It was knowledge carved into tradition. Every material came from the land, but nothing was used blindly. Every trick had purpose. In a world where temperatures plunged far below freezing, the Plains tribes created a home where nights were bearable, mornings were possible, and survival wasn't luck. It was skill, planning, and wisdom passed down through the hands of generations. Daily life in winter revolved around two things: food and fire. Inside the teepee, women carried the responsibility of nourishment. They cooked over the central fire, tending the flames with practiced precision so warmth stayed in and smoke drifted out. Meals were simple but vital: broths, stews, roasted meat, each one keeping the body fueled against the cold. The most important food of all was pemmican. Women dried buffalo meat, pounded it to powder, mixed it with rendered fat and berries gathered in warmer months. It was dense, rich, and astonishingly long-lasting. A small piece could sustain hunters through long days or feed a family during storms when leaving camp meant danger. Pemmican wasn't just food. It was survival condensed. Fuel was equally essential. Women and children ventured outside to collect whatever the land offered: fallen branches, twisted shrubs, driftwood carried by wind. They also gathered buffalo chips, dried and compacted, which burned clean and hot when wood was scarce. Each basket of fuel represented warmth through the night, comfort for sleeping children, and protection against the cold. These tasks were not random chores. They were the heartbeat of winter life: steady, purposeful, shared. Cooking, collecting, feeding the fire, simple actions that held a family together. In the teepee, survival came not from force, but from cooperation, patience, and the quiet strength of daily effort. For the men of the Plains tribes, winter was never a season of waiting. It was a season of responsibility. When storms pinned the camps down and icy winds roared across the prairie, men turned to the careful work of maintenance. Tools were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Bowstrings were tightened, spear points reshaped, arrow shafts straightened, and hunting traps repaired. Every scrape of a stone across metal, every tightening of a sinew cord, was preparation for the next hunt. A tool that failed in the cold could mean hunger, so men worked with patience and focus. When weather eased, even briefly, hunting began. Wrapped in layered hides, men tracked buffalo, deer, or elk across open snowfields. They moved silently, reading the direction of the wind, studying fresh tracks, and conserving energy. The hunt required skill, but it also demanded respect for the land, for the animal, and for the life it would sustain. Meat fed families, bones became tools, hides became shelter. Nothing was taken for sport. Everything was taken for survival. Inside the teepee, men shaped new arrows, carved snowshoe frames, repaired leather bindings, and taught their sons each detail. Instruction wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, consistent, passed from hand to hand, eye to eye. Boys learned not only how to build tools, but when to use them, and why they mattered. Winter work was not about proving strength. It was about contribution, the steady, thoughtful effort that made life possible for everyone inside the teepee. In the cold, strength alone was never enough. What mattered was preparation, patience, and commitment to the family. The Great Plains stretched for hundreds of miles, a landscape vast and open, beautiful but unforgiving. Trees were scarce, and wood was not something you could count on. Yet the teepee adapted perfectly to this environment. It needed only a handful of long poles, and those poles served more than one purpose. When the camp moved, whether to follow buffalo herds or to escape a storm, those same poles became a travois, a simple sled that carried belongings across the prairie. First pulled by dogs, and later by horses, the travois turned the teepee into the most portable home ever engineered for the open land. Mobility wasn't an inconvenience. It was strategy. The Plains tribes did not try to conquer the environment or bend it to their will. They flowed with it. They moved when resources shifted, when buffalo migrated, when weather changed. The teepee made that possible. It could be taken down in minutes, packed efficiently, and rebuilt before nightfall. It was shelter shaped for a world that never stood still. But beyond practicality, the teepee represented something deeper, a worldview. It was proof that humans did not have to dominate the land to survive on it. Instead of fighting nature, they read its rhythms. Instead of cutting forests to build permanent walls, they lived lightly on the earth, leaving almost no trace when they moved on. The teepee was not just a building, it was a philosophy made visible. Asterisk, asterisk, to live with the land, not over it. Asterisk, asterisk. It embodied respect. Respect for the animals that became food and shelter, for the winds that shaped the prairie, and for the cycles that governed life. The teepee stood as a reminder that survival can coexist with balance, and that a home can be strong without ever being rooted to one place. If a teepee could survive the harshest winters nature ever created, imagine what other knowledge still hides in Indigenous history. At Tribal History USA, we don't just rediscover the past, we learn from it. Join us as we uncover what the earth, the ancestors, and the old ways still have to teach.